The studio lights pulsed. As the pulse went live to millions across the country, its familiar logo flashing across television screens, just as Chris Rock strutted onto the stage, holding a wireless mic like a weapon. The audience roared before he even spoke, anticipating the no-holds-barred comedy that had made him a household name. Without missing a beat, he launched into his monologue, his tone playful but biting. "Melania Trump," he declared, pacing the stage, "isn't a first lady. She's a luxury prisoner." Laughter exploded. He let the line breathe, then leaned in, eyes gleaming with mischievous confidence. "I'm serious. She doesn't walk, she glides, like she's planning her escape. Blink twice if you're in trouble, Melania." The crowd howled. Rock turned toward the massive screen behind him and, with a swipe, pulled up a graph of trending Google searches. "Look at this," he said, pointing at the upward spike. "Top trending phrase of the week, Melania divorce." "Don't blame me, blame the internet." Even the host, Maya Benton, let out a laugh, though she tried to keep it professional. Chris was electric, in full control, surfing the momentum like a master showman. The crowd was eating it up, laughing, cheering, clapping as Rock continued roasting, but backstage a different mood was brewing. In the green room just off set, Karoline Leavitt sat watching the live feed on a monitor. Her posture was still, her face unreadable, but her eyes were locked on the screen with a cold intensity. Every punchline, every cheer from the audience, every smug glance from Rock only sharpened her focus. She didn't flinch. She didn't blink. She waited. And then, without turning from the screen, she spoke calmly to the producer beside her. "Give me 2 minutes," she said. "That's all I need." The producer glanced at her, half impressed, half unsure, but nodded. On the screen, Rock was mid-rant, riding high on audience approval. But he didn't know that a storm was about to walk onto that stage, not with noise, but with numbers, not with rage, but with receipts. And in 2 minutes, the tone of the night would shift from spectacle to something much sharper, something colder, something no amount of charisma could deflect. Because Karoline Leavitt wasn't here to laugh, she was here to correct. And the moment the lights turned toward her, the show would no longer be his. The studio of the Pulse was a perfect reflection of its name, vibrant, fast-paced, unapologetically modern. A sleek combination of bright LED panels, sharp audio transitions, and a roaring live audience created an atmosphere more electric than political. At the center of the spectacle stood Maya Benton, the show's magnetic host, known for walking the line between journalistic curiosity and late-night entertainment. Her style was hands-off. Let the guests speak, let the chaos breathe. And tonight, chaos had taken the form of Chris Rock, who was still basking in the residual laughter from his opening barrage. Across the stage, however, a different energy was entering. The camera cut to Karoline Leavitt as she stepped into the spotlight. The moment she appeared, the room's tempo subtly shifted. She wasn't loud, she wasn't trying to match Chris's energy. She didn't need to. She brought a colder kind of presence, disciplined, composed, and laser-focused. At just 29, she carried the bearing of someone twice her age, her posture straight, her expression unreadable. Clad in a sleek navy suit and armed with a discreet tablet, she took her seat opposite Chris and waited for the first line to come. It didn't take long. "Uh-oh," Chris grinned, turning to the audience. "Looks like the comedy police just showed up." Laughter erupted again, but this time Karoline's face didn't move. No roll of the eyes, no tight-lipped smile, just stillness. Maya Benton chuckled into her mic and tried to lighten the moment. "Let's give her a chance to ruin the fun, shall we?" The crowd laughed, but there was tension beneath it now, and anticipation. Maya turned toward Karoline. "Karoline, you've heard what Chris said. You've seen the Google trends. How do you respond to the claim that Melania Trump is, quote, a luxury prisoner?" Karoline didn't blink. "With something that's been in short supply tonight," she said calmly. "Truth." The room shifted again, slightly quieter now, no laughter. Chris leaned back, smirking, but he didn't interrupt. Karoline continued, her voice measured. "We can joke, we can speculate, but facts still matter, and I'm here to deliver them." Maya raised an eyebrow. "All right then, deliver away." Chris added, "Just don't put us to sleep." Another light chuckle from the crowd. Karoline looked directly at him. "I'll try not to, though it seems the audience has been asleep to the facts for a while." There was an audible "ooh" from the crowd. Not quite applause, but not disapproval either. Chris's smirk faded for a half-second before returning. "Go on," he said, gesturing playfully. "Tell us why the hostage loves the mansion." Karoline didn't respond to the bait. Instead, she turned to Maya. Melania Trump has served as First Lady through 4 years of relentless public scrutiny. In that time, she led 51 charity events across the country, visited 15 nations in official capacity, and created a nationwide initiative to combat cyberbullying in schools. Not once did she flinch from her role or her responsibility. That doesn't sound like a prisoner. That sounds like a professional. Her tone never rose. She never rushed. Every sentence landed with precision, not drama. Chris rolled his eyes. That's not devotion, that's contract work. Karoline looked at him again, this time with the faintest trace of amusement. If your argument rests on memes and Google searches, and mine on public record and government logs, whose argument belongs in a courtroom and whose belongs on a bathroom wall? The crowd gave its first real gasp of the night. Not outrage, surprise. Chris's face froze for half a second. Maya straightened in her chair. "Okay," she said carefully. "That was pointed." Karoline nodded, not breaking eye contact. Facts tend to feel that way when you've gotten too comfortable with fiction. Chris leaned forward now, feigning curiosity. "Tell me then, how many times has Melania spoken out in defense of American families? Where was she when migrant kids were being separated? Where was her compassion?" Karoline didn't hesitate. "In the same place yours was when you used those same families as punchlines." Silence. The audience, visibly stirred, didn't know whether to cheer or cringe. Maya shifted in her seat. The mood had changed. Chris looked at Karoline, this time without a joke ready to go. The battle lines were no longer comedy versus politics. This was fame versus facts, wit versus preparedness. And Karoline, without needing to raise her voice, had let everyone in the room know she came armed, not with sarcasm, but with truth time-stamped and sourced. And this time, the room was listening. Chris leaned back in his chair, adjusting his microphone like he was resetting for round 2. "Melania hasn't smiled in 10 years, he said, grinning as he turned to the crowd. "That's not a marriage, that's a hostage situation." The audience exploded with laughter. He stood up, pacing slightly like a stand-up comic in his element, feeding off the room's energy. "Every time you see her next to Trump, she looks like someone blinking in Morse code. Like, 'Help me!'" Another roar of laughter. Even Maya Benton cracked a smile, though she looked to Karoline with a flicker of sympathy, aware that the balance was shifting hard. Karoline sat still, unfazed outwardly, but her silence was being drowned out by punchlines. She opened her mouth to respond, but the timing was gone. The crowd wasn't listening. Every time she inhaled to speak, another wave of applause or laughter rolled through, cutting her off. Chris kept going. "Look, I'm not saying she doesn't care about causes. I'm just saying, if I had $1 for every time she disappeared during a crisis, I'd be able to build that wall myself." He paused for effect, soaking in the applause. "Scratch that. I'd have enough to fly her back to Slovenia first class." Karoline raised her hand slightly, a signal to Maya trying to re-enter the conversation, but Chris was now in full stride. "Let's not pretend we don't know what this is. It's a political arrangement, power for loyalty, and the only wall she wants is the one between their bedrooms." The audience erupted once more, some standing now, clapping like it was a Netflix special. Maya finally leaned forward, cutting in with a laugh. All right. Chris, give Karoline a second to respond." She turned to Leavitt. "Karoline, is it true Melania rarely appeared at major White House events? And if so, what does that say about her role?" Karoline started to speak. "Actually..." But Chris, half joking, raised his eyebrows and mimed falling asleep, making a loud snore sound into the microphone. The crowd burst again. Karoline hesitated, her jaw tight. "If I may," she tried again, her voice steady but now clearly fighting through the noise. But the audience wasn't ready to hear numbers or timelines. Not yet. Maya gestured for calm, but the momentum was with Chris, and he knew it. "This is what happens," he said, winking at the crowd, "when you bring a spreadsheet to a street fight." The line crushed. Karoline, still calm, adjusted her folder slightly on her lap, but her voice was now muted by the weight of spectacle. She hadn't lost control, but she had lost the room, at least for now. The studio, once tense and balanced, had tipped in favor of laughs over logic, and Karoline, despite being the only one at the table holding documented facts, found herself temporarily sidelined. The audience didn't want clarity, they wanted a show, and for this moment Chris Rock was delivering exactly that. The silence Karoline sat in wasn't weakness, it was strategy, but to those watching, unaware of what was coming next, it looked a lot like defeat. The moment the laughter began to fade, Karoline Leavitt moved. With deliberate calm, she opened the folder resting on her lap and tapped the tablet embedded inside. The screen behind her, previously used for Chris Rock's comedy slides, lit up with a clean, bold heading, Melania Trump, Public Record of Engagement. The studio, still catching its breath from Rock's last punchline, grew quieter. Karoline stood, not dramatically but firmly, and began. In the span of just 3 years as First Lady, Melania Trump organized and led 51 verified charity events across the United States, from veterans' housing initiatives to opioid awareness campaigns in rural communities. She tapped again. The screen changed to a map, each state highlighted with the events she had hosted or attended. She launched and personally oversaw a 5-nation anti-bullying initiative focused on cyber harassment, visiting classrooms, speaking to students directly, without press, without spectacle. This screen changed again, this time showing footage of Melania at a children's hospital in Cairo, at a mental health summit in Tokyo, addressing a panel on youth safety in Brussels. The audience quieted further, some leaning forward, unsure whether to cheer or challenge, and she completed 15 international diplomatic trips, some alongside the president, others alone, representing the United States with poise, multilingual grace, and a record of 0 scandals. If that's what you call a prisoner, I'd ask what kind of captivity allows for that kind of schedule. Chris, shifting in his chair, chuckled. That's PR, not presence, he muttered into the mic. You show up for ribbon cutting, take a picture and bounce, doesn't mean you're invested. Karoline turned to him, voice calm but piercing. Presence isn't measured by camera flashes, especially when the person doing the mocking builds their argument off Google Trends and meme culture. The audience murmured, this time not with laughter, but with recognition. The mood was changing. Karoline didn't stop there. You say Melania hasn't smiled in years. Maybe she stopped smiling when critics decided her silence meant submission. When late-night comics reduced a woman's marriage to punchlines without ever once researching her work, Chris opened his mouth but said nothing. Maya Benton, who had been chuckling earlier, now watched with a different kind of focus. The segment had shifted. What was once entertainment had become accountability. We live in a world, Karoline continued, where a search engine trend is considered proof of a person's inner life. Meanwhile, hours of service, dozens of speeches, and tireless work with no personal gain are erased, because they don't fit the narrative. The screen behind her dimmed. She sat back down. Say what you want about politics, but when we let internet jokes carry more weight than public records, we're not just misinformed, we're complicit. For the first time since she entered the stage, the room was silent. Not stunned, engaged. Even Maya didn't jump in right away. Chris sat back, arms crossed, smile faded, and in that stillness, Karoline didn't need to declare she had regained control. Everyone in the room already knew. The silence that followed Karoline's takedown wasn't empty. It was charged, like a vacuum after an explosion. Chris Rock, usually master of the room, leaned forward in his chair with a forced chuckle, trying to brush off the weight of the moment. All right, he muttered into the microphone. Stats girl brought the PowerPoint. There was a scattered laugh, but it was thin, hesitant. The crowd was no longer erupting. They were processing. Karoline didn't react. She simply sat poised, her hands resting lightly on her folder as if to say, I'm not done yet. Chris, sensing the shift, stood up and began to pace again, his go-to move to recapture control. Listen, he said, raising his voice. I'm not saying she didn't do stuff. I'm saying it never looked like she wanted to. There's a difference between showing up and showing up, you know? He gestured wildly, trying to inject rhythm back into the air. 50 charity events, cool, but did she speak at any of them without reading off a script like she was held hostage? A few people chuckled, but many didn't. It wasn't landing like it used to. Karoline didn't flinch. Instead, she calmly tapped her tablet again, and the screen behind them lit up with a clip. Melania, on stage at a youth mental health conference, speaking off script to a young girl in tears. No teleprompter, no notes. Just presence. Just empathy. Karoline said nothing. She didn't need to. The clip spoke for itself. Chris looked at the screen, then back at the audience. He tried again. Look, it's not personal. I just don't trust anyone who says less than Siri. A few more awkward laughs. It wasn't enough. The room wasn't laughing with him. They were watching him scramble. You're really going to sit there and tell me she wasn't just there to pose for the camera and keep quiet? He added, turning sharply toward Karoline. Finally, she responded, not loudly, not aggressively, but with precision. You're mistaking dignity for detachment, she said. Melania didn't scream for attention. She didn't trade authenticity for applause. And you don't get to mock a woman's silence just because it makes you uncomfortable. The audience went still again, but this time the stillness was followed by applause. Not wild, not eruptive, but steady, rising. Chris blinked. He hadn't lost the mic, but he'd lost the moment. Maya Benton, caught somewhere between moderator and observer, looked at him and then at Karoline, recognizing what was happening. The power in the room had shifted. Karoline stood up. You called her a prisoner, she said evenly, but she crossed oceans, represented this country in war zones, visited children in hospitals, and led policy initiatives you've never once mentioned, not because they didn't happen, but because you didn't bother to learn about them. She stepped forward slightly, not advancing but anchoring. You make jokes about her blinking for help. Let me ask you, Chris, when's the last time you looked at a woman and respected her silence instead of ridiculing it? That landed hard. The audience, now dead silent, didn't know whether to clap or hold their breath. Chris looked down, then back at Maya. Man, I didn't come here for this, he muttered. I came here to joke, not to get a lecture. Karoline raised an eyebrow. You didn't come to joke. You came to tear someone down who doesn't talk back. And now that someone is... Chris threw his hands up. This is crazy, he said, voice louder now, more defensive than defiant. This isn't comedy anymore, it's a press conference. Maya leaned in, calm but firm. Or maybe it's the first time your jokes met evidence. That broke something. Chris's face twisted. Not in anger, but in frustration. The kind that only grows when charm fails. He grabbed his mic, looked at the crowd, and shook his head. Whatever, man. I'm out. He turned, walked off stage, no punchline, no bow, just silence behind him, followed by a soft murmur that grew into a slow, rising applause, for the woman still standing. Karoline didn't smile. She didn't gloat. She simply turned back to her seat, adjusted her notes, and sat with the same composure she'd had from the start. Maya looked at her almost in disbelief. Karoline Leavitt, she said softly, you've just flipped this entire conversation. And she had. Not with spectacle, not with sound bites, but with something far harder to fight. Facts. Chris hadn't just lost control. He'd run out of defense. And America, watching live, had just seen the moment when fame met its match. The air in the studio remained still long after Chris Rock had exited. There was no music, no transition, just silence, a rare kind of silence, not awkward, not forced, but heavy with realization. Karoline Leavitt sat alone on stage now, the screen behind her frozen on the last image she had shown. Melania Trump speaking to children in a hospital, no script, no spotlight, just sincerity. Maya Benton glanced off camera as if searching for direction from the control room, but no cue came. Even the producers seemed to understand. This wasn't something you rushed. This wasn't just the end of a debate. It was the moment a curtain was pulled back and the audience saw something they weren't supposed to see. A narrative had cracked. Across the country, televisions and live streams lit up with replays. Clips of Karoline's line, "You came to tear down someone who doesn't talk back," and now that someone is circulated faster than any of Chris Rock's punchlines. People weren't just reacting, they were reassessing. On morning shows and late-night panels, the tone shifted dramatically. It wasn't about the celebrity moment anymore, it was about what it revealed. Analysts who once chuckled at Melania Trump's reserved demeanor now questioned whether they had misunderstood silence as weakness. Pundits on cable networks asked, have we made it too easy to confuse charisma with credibility? Even Maya, still live on the pulse, sat in uncharacteristic stillness. I think we need to talk about what just happened, she finally said, turning back toward Karoline. Not just between you and Chris, but what this says about how we've been talking as a culture. Karoline nodded once, but she didn't speak. She let the space breathe. Maya continued, we invite comedians, politicians, influencers, and somehow the loudest voice always wins. But tonight, the loudest voice walked off stage, and the quietest voice made us all stop. It wasn't a compliment, it was a confession, a reckoning. Karoline finally spoke, her tone softer now, the edge gone but the conviction intact. I didn't come here to go viral, she said. I came here because we've let entertainment replace accountability, because the easiest way to discredit a woman is to laugh at her silence, and because no one else was going to correct the record. The audience didn't clap, they just listened. And listening, true, undistracted listening, was rare in a room like this. On social media, the reactions evolved. The meme accounts that once joked about Melania blinking in code now posted side-by-side images, her charity work, her speeches, her foreign visits. The comment sections told the real story. I never knew any of this. I think we were wrong about her. Karoline didn't just defend Melania, she defended every woman who gets ignored for being quiet. Newsrooms scrambled to adjust. CNN labeled the exchange a rare public reversal. Fox News called it the night a comedian was fact-checked off stage. Even late-night hosts hesitated, unsure whether to mock or reflect. And as the nation watched, it became clear this wasn't just about Chris Rock or Melania Trump. This was about the media machine, the culture of mockery, the viral first thinking that had trained the public to laugh before thinking, dismiss before researching. That system had just taken a hit. Not a collapse, but a visible fracture. The kind that doesn't go away overnight. Karoline remained seated as Maya closed the segment. No music, no applause sign, just a quiet, firm send-off. We started tonight expecting comedy, Maya said, but we ended up confronting something a little more serious, how often we mistake ridicule for truth. The credits rolled without flair, and across the country, people didn't change the channel. They replayed, rewatched, reconsidered. In living rooms, dorms, phone screens, and airport lounges, the same question echoed in the back of people's minds. If we've been wrong about her, who else have we been wrong about? And just like that, the culture shifted, not overnight, not entirely, but enough. Enough to plant a seed of discomfort in every cheap insult, every recycled joke, every one-liner built on ignorance. Karoline Leavitt didn't just defend one woman's dignity. She held a mirror up to this system. And for the first time in a long time, the system didn't laugh back. The studio was almost empty now. The crew moved quietly, gathering equipment under dimmed lights. And Maya Benton stood off to the side, her headset resting around her neck, still processing the ripple effect of what had unfolded just an hour earlier. But at the center of the stage, alone, sat Karoline Leavitt. Her notes were closed, the tablet was off, her expression was still. Not victorious, not smug, just resolved. A production assistant approached from the shadows, whispering something about scheduling, but Karoline didn't look up. Her eyes were fixed on the floor where Chris Rock had been pacing just minutes before, where he had laughed, provoked, then exited, empty-handed, outmaneuvered, and unexpectedly silenced. Maya walked back onto the set slowly, glancing toward the booth. No camera was rolling now, but instinctively she faced the center and spoke. Karoline, she said gently, before you go, do you have a final thought for the audience watching at home? Karoline looked up. Her voice, when it came, was quieter than it had been all night, but no less direct. We live in a country where silence is mocked more often than it's understood, where it's easier to make someone the punchline than to ask why they never shouted in the first place. She stood slowly, straightened her blazer, and looked toward the now empty seats. But dignity doesn't need a spotlight, and truth doesn't need applause. It just needs someone willing to carry it. Even when no one's laughing, she didn't wait for a response. She simply turned and walked off stage. No music played, no closing credits, just the image of her retreating into the corridor, heels clicking softly against the floor, composed, unswayed, unforgettable. As the screen faded to black, a slow montage began. Short clips played in sequence. Melania Trump speaking softly to a child in a hospital. Karoline flipping open her folder. Chris Rock rolling his eyes just before Karoline spoke. Maya leaning forward, stunned. The audience turning quiet. Then came the overlay text, in white letters on a black background. She didn't raise her voice. She didn't trade insult for insult. She just told the truth. And for the first time, the room listened. One final image flashed across the screen. Karoline, standing alone at center stage, back straight, eyes forward, and beneath it, in bold but understated font, she didn't come for the spotlight, she came for the record. And that night, history heard her. The screen went dark, and across the country, in living rooms, coffee shops, and quiet corners of scrolling phones, people weren't laughing anymore. They were thinking.